This question wants the overall structure of the text. Don't read too much into that. It's basically the main idea, right? Just kind of think as you're reading what's basically happening, and then we're just going to summarize that in some way. Changes to vegetation cover and other human activities influence carbon and nitrogen levels in soil, though how deep these effects extend is unclear. So for that sentence, there's something unclear, right? There's something we don't know. That's the only thing I took away from that sentence. Hypothesizing that differences in land use lead to differences in carbon and nitrogen levels that are not restricted to the topsoil layer. This person and colleagues sampled soils across multiple land use types within each of several Ethiopian locations. Oh boy, okay, lot in there. So hypothesis, right? There's a hypothesis, and knowing that they're doing this hypothesis, these people sampled things, right? So I purposely skipped over the parentheses pieces because I know when the SAT does that, they're basically just trying to disrupt your flow, right? They're trying to interrupt you. Now, it might be information that I can get later and use later if I need to, but I in the moment, I just want to read the sentence without as many interruptions. So I'm trying to just understand what's happening. For now, all I really get is there's a hypothesis and then some sort of experiment that was testing that hypothesis. They found, though, oh boy, that across land use types, carbon and nitrogen decreased to comparably low levels beyond depths of 30 centimeters. Okay, so in one sense, this is a very basic SAT experiment, right? You have some sort of question, a hypothesis, an experiment, and then a finding, and it's a surprising finding, right? The word though is telling me that whatever they found was different from what maybe they thought they would find. So let's see if anything just fits with that. Choice A. It describes a phenomenon that the scientists do not fully understand. Check. I agree. Explains a research team's hypothesis about that phenomenon. Check. I agree. And then describes a finding that led the team to refine the hypothesis. Okay. Well, if you're refining it, maybe because it didn't quite match up with what you initially expected, so that could be there. I'm not as confident in the check there because did they really come up with a new hypothesis? I don't know. That part seems a little bit less clear, but maybe I could go back and reread. But for now, I would just move on to choice B and see how that checks out. B, it introduces an unresolved scientific question. Check, right? It's unclear. Presents a research team's hypothesis pertaining to that question. Check. And then describes an observation made by the team that conflicts with that hypothesis. Okay, this is also very related. Now, it does conflict, right? There was that word though, but again, maybe I don't quite understand that ending part enough, right? I'm really just highlighting two words in that last sentence, so I would come back to this as well. A and B are similar. Let's look at C. It discusses a process that scientists are somewhat unclear about. Okay, well, the unclear thing I get, but is it a process that they're unclear about? I don't know. That's weird, right? That maybe seems like the experiment itself is unclear, but let's keep going. Introduces competing hypotheses about that process and then explains how a research team concluded that one of those hypotheses is correct. Well, just think about it in a dumb summary way. Were there two hypotheses or one? There was one, right? There was one that we maybe disproved in some way at the end, but that's not the same thing, right? Just because we ended with a different hypothesis or different explanation than we thought does not mean that there were two from the start, right? We only got the hypothesis of this person, Okolo, and his or her colleagues, and that's it, right? So this choice I think is definitely wrong. D, it explains a hypothesis that has been the subject of scientific debate. Well, they didn't really say that it was being debated at the beginning. That's kind of strong. That's a strong word, right? They said it was unclear. Okay, so I don't know about this. Discusses how a research team tested that hypothesis, maybe, and then presents data the team collected that validate the hypothesis. No, right? We know that they went back on it, right? There was something wrong with the hypothesis. So now we're down to A and B. So really, how I was doing those check marks all along was because there's multiple things in each choice, right? So the first bits I'm okay with. They seem to check out in both cases. So let's just focus on the part that really matters, right? Are they refining the hypothesis or is it just a matter of conflict? Well, if you're refining the hypothesis, you are coming up with a new hypothesis that's maybe related but has some sort of fundamental difference, right? You're fixing it. Did they do that? Let's go back to that last sentence. They found, though, that across land use types, carbon and nitrogen decreased to comparably low levels beyond depths of 30 centimeters. Well, why? Why did it decrease? Or what were they going to do next, right? So refining a hypothesis, I would expect them to be then saying something like, and we think now that that's because, and kind of explaining the finding. They're not explaining the finding. They're just saying what the finding is. And that the word though is really strongly suggesting that it conflicts with what they said. Now we can go back and say, what was the hypothesis in the first place? Differences in land use lead to differences in carbon and nitrogen levels that are not restricted to the topsoil layer. And they sampled land use across soils across multiple land use types within each of several Ethiopian locations. So then they found that across land use types, they decreased to comparatively low levels beyond depths of 30 centimeters, meaning that they thought land use would matter. They thought that the type of land would make a difference. Differences in land use lead to differences in carbon. But they're saying no, it didn't matter, right? No matter what type of land they tested, they found the same thing each time. So the hypothesis is we're going to test a bunch of different things, and we're going to see that the type of land that we test affects the nitrogen and carbon in it. The result was conflicting with that. It was saying, no, it actually didn't matter what land we tested. The nitrogen and carbon were the same in all of them, or kind of decreased in all of them to a certain point. So that is definitely evidence of B. There is no refining this hypothesis. There is no saying, okay, it matters with land use, but only in certain environments or in certain places. There's no refining. It literally just ends with, we were wrong. But this is a great question because it really is much better to do if you just break the choices down into little pieces and treat them like little check marks, right? We are just saying, okay, A and B are mostly the same, but there's a key difference. And if you are someone who constantly finds yourself down to two answer choices that seem really, really similar, it's because you're not breaking the answer choice down into smaller choices, because maybe they are very similar, but there's one difference, and that's the difference that matters. So try to break it apart, get rid of the things that are the same, and really focus in on what is that key difference. And then if you need to, go back to the passage and find evidence where we can choose one and get rid of the other, because there's always one right answer. They may seem similar, but one is going to always be provably right, and the other will always be provably wrong.